The year 2024 marked the 70th anniversary of the Godzilla franchise, and while the original 1954 film garnered most of the spotlight from it, other installments in the series also reached similar milestones. A total of 7 entries to be precise, and while they all deserve their own recognition, one of them seems to be the black sheep of the bunch. The film in question is none other than 1984's The Return of Godzilla. However, most Western audiences saw this movie not through its original Japanese cut, but the Americanized edit that was released 1 year later, simply titled Godzilla 1985. Back during the late 80s and all throughout the 90s, Godzilla 1985 was the only version of this movie that could be found on home video here in the States, while The Return of Godzilla was only available overseas. Fast forward to the present, and that whole scenario has made a complete 180. Now, the Japanese cut of the film is widely available all across the globe, and Godzilla 1985 almost ceases to exist. So what exactly happened here? Why hasn't the American cut seen an official up-to-date home video release yet? Right now, we will try to uncover those possible answers, because this, my fellow viewers, is what I've come to know as the Godzilla 1985 Conundrum. Before diving straight into what we got in 1985, along with the whole distribution debacle, we'll need to quickly summarize how The Return of Godzilla even saw the light of day and what ultimately led to this cut of the film. After an almost 10-year hiatus following the release of 1975's Terror of Mechagodzilla, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka and Toho finally decided it was time to revive the Godzilla series for its 30th anniversary. Their 1984 reboot would bring the King of Monsters back to its original roots as a force of nature, rather than the heroic world savior that audiences had become accustomed to. Similar to what the original installment did, The Return of Godzilla would include a heavier real-world subject within the plot revolved around Cold War tensions between the USSR and the United States. It would also be a direct follow-up to the original Godzilla film and completely ignore all prior installments in the Showa series. With all these factors at play, naturally Toho was under the impression that the film would become a huge success, and while it didn't necessarily meet their expectations at the box office, it garnered enough profit to warrant a sequel that would ultimately be released later down the line in 1989. But that's a story for another time. Not long following its initial release, Toho would begin their search for a North American distributor for the film. After having failed discussions with other potential buyers, they finally landed on the independent studio New World Pictures, co-founded by B-movie legend Roger Corman. After acquiring the rights for distribution, producer Tony Randall and New World decided that the best course of action was to alter the film in order to cater to US audiences. In their minds, The Return of Godzilla was too campy to be taken seriously. The idea was to use a similar method that had been used for prior Americanizations of tokusatsu flicks. Dub the Japanese dialogue into English and add in newly filmed scenes of American actors that would be more tongue-in-cheek in tone. To the credit of Randall, however, it was his idea to bring in actor Raymond Burr to reprise his role of the reporter Steve Martin from 1956's Godzilla King of the Monsters, which, funnily enough, was the first instance of a Hollywood studio creating a completely reworked edit of an already existing Godzilla film. Burr enjoyed the idea of returning to play a character that he hadn't done in nearly 30 years. He also took the allegory behind Godzilla very seriously and refused to make a mockery of it. Burr went as far as to alter or remove any of his character's dialogue he felt didn't fit well. With that, the more comedic aspects of the script ended up being given to the character Major McDonough, who I'm sure you're all familiar with.
That's quite an urban renewal program they got going over there.
The shooting for the newer scenes lasted no longer than 3 days, while dubbing supposedly took a total of 2 days. Even with the 10-minute addition of added footage, this version would still be 16 minutes shorter than the Japanese version due to the alterations made by New World. After post-production was finalized, the American edit of Return of Godzilla was set to release in US cinemas on August 23rd of 1985. There were several titles being floated around early on, such as Godzilla is Alive and just going with The Return of Godzilla, before ultimately landing on Godzilla 1985, The Legend is Reborn. In conjunction, Dr. Pepper launched an ad campaign worth $10 million, which included shameless product placement throughout the movie itself, sponsorship for a tie-in music video of I Was Afraid to Love You performed by Jill Elliott, and 2 television commercials that included Godzilla and a newly made monster named Newzilla drinking both Dr. Pepper and Diet Dr. Pepper. Unfortunately for New World Pictures, Godzilla 1985 had a rough box office total of $4.1 million and was slammed by critics. One notable review was done by Siskel and Ebert where they essentially trashed the film. They both described it as dull and how it lacked that so bad it's good quality for trying to play everything straight. It was also nominated for 2 1986 Razzie Awards, one for Worst Supporting Character, that being Raymond Burr, and one for Worst New Actor, that being the, and I quote, newly computerized Godzilla. So once again, Godzilla was unable to escape the schlocky image that was created for the franchise overseas years prior. Fortunately for New World, there was an upside to all this. Despite not making a huge impact during its theatrical run, Godzilla 1985 would prove to be successful on home media. New World made the movie available on VHS for the first time in 1986, and it became one of their highest grossing home video releases up until that point. The film would also find its way onto other formats like Betamax and Laserdisc. Eventually, the company was bought in 1997 by 20th Century Fox, who was a major investor in the company since the year 1994. In doing so, Anchor Bay Entertainment now held the rights to distribute all of New World's films that were part of their home video library from 1984 to 1991. This, of course, includes Godzilla 1985. Shortly following their acquisition, Anchor Bay looked to capitalize on the upcoming release of TriStar's American reimagining of Godzilla by putting together a box set containing 6 installments of the Godzilla franchise, Godzilla 1985 included, of course. Fans and collectors alike know of this as the Godzilla Biggest Battles box set. 2 versions of this set were created, one which included Son of Godzilla and another that swapped that flick out for Godzilla vs. Megalon instead. Each VHS cover featured a mural with each containing part of Godzilla as he appeared on the official poster for Godzilla 1985, although flipped horizontal, and when all were lined up together it would form the entire image. Little did anyone know at the time, this would mark the final time that Godzilla 1985 would ever be released on home video in the States. That being said, how exactly did it get to this point? Did any other company ever try to obtain this cut of the movie after Anchor Bay? Well, there were in fact efforts to try and get this adaptation released on DVD and Blu Ray, but each were obstructed by several hurdles. While the rest of Anchor Bay's catalog of Godzilla flicks were obtained by other distributors such as Classic Media and Sony, Godzilla 1985 would be left behind. The sole reasoning for this was due to legal issues with the film becoming more prominent. In light of this, Toho refused to allow anyone to distribute both Godzilla 1985 and The Return of Godzilla onto home media in North America until the film rights reverted back to them. This lasted nearly 20 years. The only way to watch the American cut on any updated format was during the early to mid-2000s through a niche satellite TV movie monster network called Monsters HD, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. This was only possible because somehow at the time Warner Brothers still owned the broadcasting rights to New World's edit. They would occasionally play Godzilla 1985 on their channel, and while there were slight differences with sound effects, music, and subtitling for any scene involving the Russian actors, it would still be the only way anyone could view the film in anything remotely close to an upscaled HD format. Even then, the only recordings that exist of it are in standard definition. The closest that any home video distributor had come to trying to get the rights to Godzilla 1985 was Kraken Releasing. In May of 2016, Kraken had announced that they had obtained the rights to distribute The Return of Godzilla for the first time in the US and would be releasing it on both DVD and Blu Ray in September of the same year. It was set to include both Japanese and English audio tracks. Originally, to coincide with the Japanese version, Kraken wanted to also put out a DVD and Blu Ray of Godzilla 1985. However, that idea fell through. According to the company's co-founder Matt Greenfield, one of the problems that arose was due to additional music placement. The music in question was created by well-known film composer Christopher Young. If that name doesn't ring any bells, he has provided the soundtrack to countless horror movies such as Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, Hellraiser 1 and 2, the first 2 Grudge movies, Drag Me to Hell, and Sinister. Or you could be like me and first discover his musical work through his contributions to the original Spider-Man trilogy. In the same year as Godzilla 1985, New World also distributed a Canadian movie by the name of DEFCON 4, which Christopher Young composed the score for. The company didn't seem to have much faith in the post-apocalyptic flick and opted to insert pieces of Chris's music into their newly shot and overall re-edited scenes for Godzilla 1985, some of which you may recognize. This was one of Christopher Young's earlier scores, so naturally New World didn't think much of it. Yet he was acknowledged in the end credits of Godzilla 1985. Advance to present day, and he's become a much bigger name, and copyrights for both films and their respective soundtracks are no longer held under the same roof. The only way to get past that would involve cutting through a large amount of red tape. With that in mind, it should come off as no surprise that trying to remotely fix or get past any of these rights issues could come off as being a huge financial headache. But nonetheless, this raises the question, will Godzilla 1985 ever see the light of day in an official capacity again? It's difficult to narrow it down to a simple answer considering we're going on almost 30 years without a physical media copy of it.
Yes, it does look that way, doesn't it?
The closest we've ever gotten to another one was almost 10 years ago, and even that was just rumblings. Although, and this is all merely speculation on my part, there's a very slim chance that could change somewhat soon. As of this recording, Criterion now own the US distribution rights to The Return of Godzilla and 3 other films in the Heisei series. On March 18th of this year, they put Godzilla vs. Biollante on 4K Blu Ray, and they were only able to do that because Toho did the same nearly 2 years ago. The reason behind this is because Toho always releases their movies on physical media first, and international distributors have to wait until enough time has passed before they can follow suit, since Blu-rays are more affordable here in the States than they are in Japan. So what that should tell us is Criterion is waiting for Toho to release The Return of Godzilla in the same 4K format, and only then will they be able to begin preparations to do the same. Now, what better way would it be to distribute the Japanese film on home media than by offering its American counterpart alongside it? In theory, it would go great with the rest of their Godzilla selection. That could also be a nice parallel to how they've consistently released the original Godzilla in the past, which never fails to include the 1956 Americanized version starring Raymond Burr himself, Godzilla King of the Monsters. Imagine how incredible it would be for collectors and fans alike to have 2 Godzilla physical media releases by Criterion that also included an American edit of that same film with Raymond Burr's character Steve Martin in it. If there were any company that could potentially accomplish this feat, it would be them. Of course, Toho and fellow rights holders have final say, but Criterion were responsible for creating a box or perhaps a book set containing the entirety of the original Showa Godzilla series, the first of its kind in North America. This is also the same distributor who was able to get the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla on that same set, which had also never been officially released here in the States up until that point, even though it was sort of hidden as a bonus feature rather than being on the film disc itself. Thanks for that, Universal. Criterion was also given an outdated and inferior transfer to work with. Thanks for that, Toho. However, if acquiring Godzilla 1985 were an obstacle they would rather avoid due to the whole rights fiasco, or if they were flat out told no by Toho themselves, then that would be totally understandable. Maybe not so much with Toho though, since they've apparently had this agenda of hiding any foreign cuts of their Godzilla films that aren't necessarily their own. But I digress. At this point, I'm just spitballing a possible scenario and being overly optimistic about it. Truth be told, I'm not even sure how I would tackle the whole distribution rights situation if it were presented to me, let alone Criterion. Having The Return of Godzilla at our disposal is a victory in itself, but not being able to access Godzilla 1985 in a higher definition is a real disappointment. Don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoyed the Japanese version. The overall themes are more effective and certain major moments of character development are still present. However, it does contain some shots of Godzilla that do look pretty corny in comparison to how he's portrayed throughout the rest of the movie. The American cut fixes this by either trimming down or completely taking those out of their adaptation. Christopher Young's music pulled from Defcon 4 fits in smoothly and complements Reijiro Koroku's already ominous score. It also feels a lot tighter in terms of pacing when compared to the Japanese cut. But that's not to say Godzilla 1985 isn't without its problems either. The comic relief can become very tiresome very fast. For as good as it is seeing Raymond Burr, he barely contributes anything to the story early on, and the US version made the highly questionable decision to turn the USSR into an antagonist by deliberately launching a nuclear missile towards Japan, whereas in the Japanese cut, that is an accidental launch that the Soviets attempt to prevent, but are unable to. Supposedly, producer Tony Randall thought it would be humorous for the Russians to essentially stir the whole pot. Sounds a lot more like propaganda to me. But that little factoid can be overlooked by yours truly for the simple addition of Raymond Burr's closing narration following Godzilla's tragic fate. If that doesn't perfectly sum up what Godzilla is all about, then I don't know what is. It's better than whatever the international English dub was trying to achieve.
Godzilla is eating his supper.
What a monster.
The biggest reason I wanted to bring this topic to the forefront of my channel was because of my personal connection to Godzilla 1985. It was one of the first Godzilla movies I ever watched as a child, and it stuck with me for a very long time. Godzilla was made to look like a fearsome force of nature and was virtually indestructible throughout the plot. The animalistic features like the snarl made this version of the Big G truly stand out from the rest. The American version even makes Godzilla feel more visceral and annoyed towards humanity as a whole. I frequently watched Godzilla King of the Monsters when I was younger, and having the choice to immediately watch what was essentially a sequel to that flick any time afterwards always felt rewarding. Having said that, when my mom and I moved to a different house, I lost possession of the VHS tape I had owned and went for an extended period of time not being able to rewatch the film. Fortunately, that has partially changed thanks to the Godzilla community as a whole. Despite all of the legal rights troubles at hand, several devoted and talented people have spent years going out of their way to preserve and even restore Godzilla 1985 to its former glory. They've even been able to manage creating something close to resembling an HD copy, thanks in part to the Monsters HD recordings and a 35mm scan of the movie that was discovered fairly recently. I won't give out where to find these restorations specifically, but with enough digging around you should be able to come across them. To those hardworking individuals, I tip my hat to you and your contributions. Your commitment to your craft has not gone unnoticed. I've also been gifted 2 copies of Godzilla 1985 by a good friend of mine, a 1992 VHS tape from Star Maker, and a not-so-legitimate Blu Ray. Oops. Hey now, in spite of this whole mess, can you really blame me? At the end of the day, The Return of Godzilla and or Godzilla 1985 will always go down as one of my personal favorite entries in the franchise, and while the official availability of the Americanized version is currently slim to none, perhaps one day that will change. With enough demand from the community, the sky's the limit. For now, Godzilla 1985, that strangely innocent and tragic edit, has gone to Earth. Whether it returns or not, or is never again seen by human eyes, the things it has taught us remain.